Today's going to be a fun, interesting, and different show. My guest today, who's really not so much a guest, more of a co-pilot, if you will, is the awesome Revolution Radio's resident military historian, Douglas Dietrich. And we're going to be going over a plethora of things involving your personal preparedness post-World of Law and Order, where you may need to defend oneself from other such miscreants who do no longer fear a state that we cannot rely on to protect us if it indeed gets to that point. First off, I'm going to allow Doug to talk a little bit about Lorien Fenton's Super Soldier Summit as a favor to the great Lorien Fenton. Douglas has a few things that he wants to say about that event. So, Doug, how you doing? You unmuted? Good.
Hey, thanks so much. Doing better now that I'm speaking with a good friend of mine, Steve Travesty, and I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be here with Steve Travesty's regular audience and any new listeners who may have joined us tonight. Really thank him for presenting me with this opportunity, and boy, do I need it. I just got off of Godlike Productions, and I'm hoping people will access as well the audio archives of Godlike Productions for the interview that was conducted today. So whatever the date is today, which I believe it's the 23rd when I started that interview with Godlike, and it ended on the 24th. But if you make sure to look up there, Wednesday the 23rd of April interview, you'll hear me in a knockdown, drag-out fight on the air that will entertain and educate you. Is the conflict between, as Mr. Travesty was kind enough to explain, a military historian and the normal people who live by fantasy in the United States, and the fantasies of history, which have led us to the point where we're at now, where Mr. Travesty and I have to discuss the potential of militant survivalism in a condition of anarchy. The reason why we have gotten to this point where we are degenerating towards anarchy is because the American paradigm, having nothing to do with the American people, but rather a paradigm imposed on them by the Constitutional Republic of the United States, this paradigm has not served the American people well. This paradigm has led us to a auto-destruction in the same sense that any pseudoscientific paradigm would. To put this into perspective, if one were to follow the medievalist logic of birds flying and admiring or observing the flight of birds, and if one were to take a non-Da Vincian approach, which was a Renaissance approach, opposed to trying to emulate the mechanical aspects of the bird's flight, instead taking a classical Hellenic Grecan approach of pre-Aristotelian logic and just gluing feathers all over yourself or all over an automobile, and assuming that the feathers will bring you flight, since every bird that you've seen fly has feathers. If you roll that car tarred and covered in feathers off of a cliff, it's not going to fly. Or if you leap off of a building tarred and feathered, you're not going to fly. But my point is, this is what the paradigm has done to the United States. We've been operating on foundations of sand and quicksand, and whatever structures we build upon it in terms of our paradigm, in terms of our axioms, are quickly disintegrating because the foundations are false. So you get to hear that if you check out the live raw feed, Godlike Productions archives, and I do recommend that everyone do that. Hopefully it is an interview which will live in family and infamy and get spread and viral all over the internet and help promote the truth and what I'm all about and what Mr. Travesty is all about. Now, as for Lorien Fenton, I am, of course, indebted to her as my manageress. She's going through some very hard times. Do contact her at lorien@douglasdietrich.com, and just as if you can help the station, if you can help her in any way, shape, or form, even with just moral support, don't be afraid to contact her, lorien@douglasdietrich.com. As for the Super Soldier Summit, we will be holding that on the weekend of May 17th, 18th, and 19th, I believe. And the way to find out for sure is to go to www.supersoldiersummit.com. And our website was attacked and knocked down day after day. It probably took a month and the loss of about $10,000 of...
Well, go figure. Douglas is in the middle of a diatribe about being kicked off the internet, and Douglas gets kicked off the internet. I mean, like, are they doing this because they think it's funny?
Yes.
Douglas, there you are.
Yes. Oh, my God.
I was just making the comment that while you were going off on a diatribe about getting kicked off the internet, you got kicked off the internet.
That, it really tells us something. But at any rate,
it tells us to say hello to the NSA. Hey guys, how's it going?
yeah, it's very frustrating, but this is part of, one could ask, the way James Arthur Yanchik has validly and legitimately asked, how can, why don't they just take you off the air completely? And they've got problems. First off, the example of William Cooper is an excellent example. If they kill you, you personally, not your relatives, they kill you, they make a martyr of you, and everybody begins to take seriously what you said. If they cut you off the air, then people know you've been cut off the air. And basically that gives validity to what you've said. And one way or another, people will find out some way to find out what it is you're trying to say. But if they continually make it difficult, inconvenient, frustrating, and just maddening to listen to you with constant interruptions, then they get people to tune out. And it's like having a person who stutters while he speaks. They, in a subconscious way, discredit the speaker because the technical issues make him look unprofessional, even though he or his staff or the radio station from which he is sourcing are in no way, shape, or form responsible for these interruptions. It somehow subconsciously is imbued on them as a professional lack, and they are considered to be found wanting in public eyes, and then the public stops listening to them. So that is part of the paradigm, part of the scheme, part of the strategy that the United States government uses to shut you down and turn people away from you. So always keep that in mind. If somebody's being attacked and taken off the air constantly, as we are at Revolution Radio, as we are at every interview that I conduct, we were taken off the air tonight. As soon as I started talking about the real history of World War II, we were taken off the air. Everything I was saying was simply for the sake of being recorded for posterity. Nothing was being broadcast tonight with what I was saying earlier on Godlike Productions. Hopefully that doesn't happen with us tonight, but it gives you a sense of the importance of what we're contending with. I mean,
was the audio recorded despite the broadcast?
I believe so. I know that the people in the chat room could hear us, and I know that they were the only ones who could hear us. All we had were the people in the chat room who could hear us. Everyone else, we were off the air. They took it down. And so it was because of what I was saying was so radical. And they had an agent in place. They had some dude from River City who was some kind of cowboy who was basically consistently just talking and talking and talking, trying to drown me out, which, of course, the dialogue, you don't invite a guest on to do that. That's obviously a government shill, just the way these things work. And there were some rumors of the Godlike Productions being some of a COINTELPRO op, obviously phenomenon, and a lot of the magnificent staff who work with them are not like that at all. But like all people trying to get out the truth, they get infiltrated, infested with COINTELPRO agents, like that dude from River City who, Kingman or whatever, some of these other people who were basically just trying to constantly monologue underneath what I was saying and muting me out so that I could not be heard. So they had sabotage from the inside, believe me, and we know exactly who it is. That Kingman dude from River City, or if I'm getting his name wrong, the cowboy from River City who claimed some of the questions were from Kingman, whatever. It's over now. People will hear it. You'll get the picture of what I'm saying. We'll move on to very important immediate stuff, one of them being the Super Soldier Summit. Website was sabotaged. We think we have it functioning now to the point where people can access it. Do order tickets. If you cannot, pay a much lower price for the Skyping or whatever they call it. There is a technique that Carrie Lynn Cassidy uses to broadcast worldwide on the internet what her convention Awake and Aware was showing, and you could tell us perhaps what that technology would be. I'm too tech-tarded and cyberphobic to even comprehend what that might be. When they have a convention and they live stream it. Live streaming, I guess it's called. And so people can pay far less for the live stream than they would for a ticket. But, of course, it's not the same as personally meeting Ed Opperman, the private investigator for multiple celebrities, including Howard Stern and a number of other very large names such as that he wound up contending with, such as that. Who is that woman who ran for president that nobody remembers anymore? Drill Baby Drill.
See, you want me to say her name? I do remember it.
Oh, please.
Sarah Palin.
Yep. Sarah Palin. Yes, he worked in a case that involved her as one of the investigative subjects, where his client wound up being very afraid for her life, and Sarah Palin lost her bid to run for the presidency. That's how important some of his cases have been. He lives in right outside of Las Vegas. He'll be coming down to Henderson, Nevada, where the Super Soldier Summit is taking place, to speak with us, along with Dr. Richard Allen Miller, who was the consultant to the X-Files, because he had worked with the United States government for a number of years. Any number of people. You just look at the lineup, you'll see who's there, and I think it's a fabulous lineup. They're worth meeting personally. If you can't afford it, believe me, no one understands more than any of us. And, see if you can pay for the live stream, and that will help maintain and pay for the conference itself. In terms of Sarah Palin, the thing that I do remember is the woman who portrayed her in a pornographic film called Nailin' Palin is Lisa Ann, pornographic adult actress who deserves a lot more credit. She's been a long time, very athletic build.
I think when Eminem made his music video, like around 2008 or so, I think he had her in the music video to portray Sarah Palin in the way that Eminem likes to mock and parody pop culture icons. And Eminem very much went to war against the machine, and it led to a lot of the issues that he has had in the last couple of years.
Wow. I mean, you would be familiar with that. You're very familiar with the music industry, and I appreciate that. It's good to see that, Lisa Ann. I wish Sarah Palin's career had lasted only for the sake of providing Lisa Ann a bit more money as a Sarah Palin double. That would have been funny, at least. But at any rate, what we are discussing tonight, aside from the Super Soldier Summit, one final plug for that for now, the website, supersoldiersummit.com. Go over there and check it out, and you'll help us all immensely just by investigating it. We are blending it only tangentially into what we're speaking of, because super soldiery is really a study of super victimization. And the correct name for the super soldiers would be, in my opinion, super victims. And these are not bigger, badder super soldiers. That would be more in keeping with something that has been popularized through very bad films made by Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, two of our favorite people who are just learning to speak English. They got together and they did a lot of very Northern European grunting through Universal Soldier, and programs like that are more what people, what comes to mind when people think Super Soldier. That's not what it's about. Super Soldier is usually child prostitutes, cum assassins who are broken in mind, body, and spirit, and directed towards targets to compromise them. And that is how the United States military junta continues to fund itself, because no matter what happens statistically on any given year, they are less than 1% of the population, literally, counting the entire Department of Defense, counting the U.S. Navy, the Coast Guard, the National Guard, the Reserves, all the branches of service put together is 2.5 million people, and that's being cut down through sequestration to far less, and they're already at 2.5 million people, less than 1% of the population, and they're going to get even smaller. They're a very cultic community by nature of being so small, and this community at less than 1% gets, on any given year statistically, well over 50% of the fiscal discretionary income budgeted to it. So how does this keep happening? Be through the Super Soldier program. Politicians who continually lobby in Congress for them to continually get this astronomical funding basically is done through the compromise of the politicians, through these child prostitute, cum assassin threats of blackmail / death. And in the meantime, we will hopefully cover through Super Soldier Summit, which was originally very successful because it was more of a therapy session than it was, and a rehabilitation opportunity than it was a convention. It was not open to outsiders. It was very few people were allowed to come who were not part of the rehabilitation community, psychiatric and counseling, and the super soldiers themselves, and a few interested outside observers were allowed. No journalists even volunteered to show up, even though they were welcome. And in terms of what we're doing now is we are opening it to the public, and so do take advantage of this. Let's make it happen. And in the meantime, Mr. Travesty wanted to talk a bit about militant survivalism, how we would handle certain situations that the government itself is obviously expecting as inevitable. And I'd like him to introduce us into that and kind of lead me by the nose, because after the drop-dead argument I was through, I've still got flesh in my teeth that I need to pick out.
Well, let's segue it nice and organically. Super soldiers, how big of a threat would it be to a community that has taken up a choice to do everything it felt was good as anybody could do to make a fortified community for a small group of people that wanted to live together, wanted to be a militia, and they were constantly on the worry of, we'll say they're renegade super soldiers that may be working for maybe like the Zeta cartels are running. You're down in like maybe Arizona, and America's fallen apart, and the Zeta cartels are running Arizona, but Arizona's still your home, and there's still good things there, so you have chosen to do something in that kind of a territory, and one of these super soldier guys, because it's the only life he's known, decides to be a gun for hire to go and attack you for your things and your stuff and your life.
Well, thank you for asking that, and I certainly think it's important to address the concept. Again, just to clarify this, and it's very important, is the super soldiers would not be the ones to do that. The very reason they use misnomers like that are to misdirect our very conceptualization of what the government uses, what it has planned. The Third Reich, when it was in the midst of the Second World War, used contraindicative code names, and one of those contraindicative code names for the largest tank ever built, which was not the King Tiger tank. It was actually a far larger tank than that, only used on the Eastern Front. The Americans never even got to see an example of it, was codenamed Maus, M-A-U-S, the German word for mouse. Whereas the small, robotically controlled drone vehicle, it was a remotely controlled, but essentially a non-autonomous robot. In other words, it was controlled by radio remote, developed by the Third Reich, was able to roll under tanks. It was so small, and roll into various structures. They also had helicopters, which were basically something most people don't recognize. The helicopters in the Third Reich were considered to be for anti-partisan warfare and also for the transport of the elite out of various hotspot areas. But in terms of the use of helicopters, most people don't even know that both the Third Reich and the Japanese had helicopters in World War II, whereas the United States did not. And the Japanese were using them for anti-submarine warfare. Again, something most Americans are entirely unaware of. The point is that the remote-controlled vehicle, the small unit, was called Goliath, which of course gives people the image of something very large. So it's the same with the super soldiers. What you have an idea of is basically not a super soldier who is essentially a child prostitute who is insinuated into someone's estate. What you are speaking of is like a commando or a special forces soldier.
The one-man army, like the movie Commando, where you can expect this one guy, this Arnold Schwarzenegger and kind of guy.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind that we need to put this into perspective, and I think people who have listened to me before have heard what I've said about various aspects of military operations, such as MAC-VSOG. That was, I believe it was Military Assistance Command Vietnam Special Operations Group was what that acronym stood for. And the MAC-VSOG I've given credit for basically being one of the ultimate killing machines. It basically probably is responsible for the deaths of more enemies than any other enemy combatants, than any other unit in the United States military history. And what they were contending with was, of course, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Each one of them, at times their unit, which was always very small, there were never more than, at the absolute maximum, 300 that were in country Vietnam, and that's stretching it. But at any given time, there were around 100 to 200 of these men in country. They sometimes suffered 100% fatality rates. But statistically, they killed about 150 enemy combatants per every one of them that died. Now, also, statistically, South Vietnamese, meaning Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the nationalist Vietnamese, and the Americans who were assisting the Republic of Vietnam, American soldiers in Vietnam, just regular troops, these troops statistically killed 3 combatants to every one of them that died. So you have remarkable killing statistics for the killing effectiveness of the American war machine, whether it is elite or whether it is conventional. But
by the way, you said it was the MAC-VSOG, is that correct?
That is correct. MAC-V, and then a dash, and then SOG. Military Assistance Command Vietnam Special Operations Group. It was a multi-service organization, meaning it consisted of sailors, such as Navy SEALs, consisted of airmen, a few for security, plus, of course, Army and Marine Corps.
So it was G.I. Joe, effectively.
Essentially, yes. It was like that, in that it was a multi-service organization, and it was a very successful experiment in a very real sense. But it's important to remember not to discredit them or the regular servicemen. These high killing ratios on everyone's side, and by the way, the machine gun was responsible for the deaths of more enemy combatants in the Vietnam War than any other weapon. And in most wars, machine guns are responsible for killing far more of enemy combatants of any nation, meaning that any nation using machine guns, the machine guns will kill more enemy combatants than any of your soldiers' rifles will statistically. Rifles are basically for self-defense. They're not really an offensive weapon. Machine guns are what take out people in groups. They're what are basically your weapon of war. Your unit is built around the machine gun unit. So to finalize what I'm saying about the one-man army, the MACV-SOG was the closest we came to that. But the reason that both the conventional troops, the regulars, and the elite achieved such high killing ratios was air support. Now, in Vietnam, what happened with the American regulars was constantly they would get into hot zones, and they would call in air support, airstrikes. And if it's really bad, like you see in the film Platoon, you see the lieutenant, I believe, who calls in an airstrike on his own unit, because at that point his unit is thoroughly combined in combat, locked in bayonet-level struggle with the Vietnamese. So at that point, he calls in an airstrike on his own unit. So that could happen, and the same thing happened with MACV-SOG. The primary purpose was to be in theater on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, find enemy concentrations along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and call in airstrikes. So even though every one of these men was very capable of hand-to-hand level combat, personal combat, keep in mind that these enormous fatality ratios, the massive difference between those of the Vietnamese and the Americans, primarily is due to air power. So the idea of the one-man army, the Rambo, the Schwarzenegger, who's coming in someplace and taking on everybody, okay, that is fantasy. It is not that there are not outstanding soldiers out there who are capable of acting as one-man armies. Probably the most exemplary of them in American history might well be Audie Murphy, very certainly up there. And Audie Murphy was able to do on a unit level what ancient heroes are recorded to have done on the level of an army. Basically, he would take on units of armor and leap from tank to tank, dropping in grenades. This ultimately earned him, the Congressional Medal of Honor and a lifetime of suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which at that point in history, unfortunately, was never diagnosed, and obviously took a lot out of him through alcoholism and antisocial behavior, and ultimately his death in an airplane as a civilian. But in terms of what happened with your, shall we say, community example, you really don't need to worry about the one-man army coming in, taking people out. You need to worry about somebody coming in, marking your region, and calling in an airstrike. That's what you need to be worried about.
My imagination is that they have the laser-guided missile system, but that takes satellite synchronicity.
Right,
it's a major resource pool, correct?
Yeah. It's not going to exist. I mean, to give you an example, Operation Desert Storm, which I was a part of, pretty much stopped dead when Saddam Hussein conducted the brilliant maneuver militarily. It was an ecocidal act. It was, in other words, an act of ecological genocide. But when he set all of those, well over 6,000 oil wells on fire, when he retreated from Kuwait, what happened was the entire offensive into his nation stopped stone cold dead. It turned from a blitzkrieg into a blitzfreeze. Because when he did that, he created so much of a cloud, a toxic cloud of particulate matter that was so thick in the air that it basically not only led to the death of all kinds of animals and people, but also literally blocked the sky from the ground. And we went from geosynchronous satellite positioning and coordination of artillery and airstrikes to compasses and grease pencils inside of lap maps. And it froze the entire operation, and that bought him another 10 to 20 years in power. So by something very similar is obviously going to happen in any societal breakdown, simply because, not because of necessarily a smokescreen like that, basically literally blocking off satellite communications with your navigational systems on which all of your electronically based air attacks are based. You don't have pilots anymore that can bomb by sight. Literally, you do not, because they're going so fast, they're going so high, they can't see jack crap on the ground. Pilots are only working electronically. All of the strikes they conduct. That's why we developed the drones. The drones are camera eyes that are basically virtualized for men playing canasta or arcade back in the control room, which is back in Las Vegas.
What would you need within reason, being in this survival defense system, that you're going to have to plan out? We're talking about really planning it and doing it well and knowing what you need. What would you need to take that thing out or hinder its ability to do its job?
Well, my impression is that drones are shot down fairly regularly in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they're taken out, of course, with basically laser-guided rockets that I don't know who is supplying them now, but they're probably purchased on the black market through military dealers that are basically somehow stealing them from the United States. I don't know if there's that many other countries that produce them. But the idea of taking out a drone with a rocket-propelled grenade, like the Vietnamese were constantly taking down helicopters with rocket-propelled grenades, that is, I don't believe, going to be possible. You can take it down. It's possible. You can take it down, but it's going to be more luck and accident than actual aiming. I don't think that you're going to need to worry about that, though. It's a legitimate question when society is functioning, because then you got a situation where I honestly wonder why they didn't take out Bill Dorner with a drone, but Christopher Dorner, excuse me. But they took out Christopher Dorner by burning him alive, like they burned everybody at Waco, and were trying to do so.
They did authorize drones to search for him, which makes him the first American citizen on U.S. soil to date to be publicly, officially targeted for drone surveillance. And the survivor of the Boston Massacre is the second person in the public knowledge that has been also targeted in this fashion.
Right. By the way, it is important to bring up to our listenership that 7-Eleven has officially made the statement and taken the stance that those gentlemen who they claim were responsible for the Boston Massacre, the Boston bombing, did not rob 7-Eleven. I don't know if you're aware of that. So,
I didn't know they were accused of robbing a 7-Eleven. As far as I'm concerned, they're patsies.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's a healthy attitude to have, and I can understand exactly why you go through. But the running narrative was that they had conducted the bombing and then left the scene and robbed a 7-Eleven to get money while they were trying to make it out of area. So it was a damning looking story. Of course, it was entirely contrived. So all credit to 7-Eleven. There goes an industry for you that are not bastards who came out and stood up against the government and said those men have not robbed the 7-Eleven. So that is a very interesting situation. It shows how our society is deconstructing and devolving, no matter how many drones and planes that they've got. What you really need to worry about, far more than that, are typical rogues and villains as opposed to drone strikes, because if we get to that point of societal collapse, the drones are not going to be a factor. All of these machines, of course, in the Terminator scenario, you have a very specific scenario where you've got an artificial intelligence manipulated mass production facility or a series thereof that are continuing to churn out via the artificial intelligence manipulation and administration further and further Terminator drones. Mm-hmm. Now, and this provides it with an army based on resources that it's amassing through other robotics to put to its automated assembly line. So you have a von Neumann machine, a perpetual motion machine. You have basically a war machine set on autopilot that in the Terminator scenario. Okay, reality in the United States, that's never going to happen.
There are people that believe that DARPA and other industries are involved in effectively making it come true, and a lot of people understand that James Cameron, who takes credit for the vision of the Terminator universe, is, like Steven Spielberg, a tipped-off insider in the Hollywood system. And in fact, he has made the suspicious move of moving to Australia as his effective home and general place of filming, which makes people wonder, why is he abandoning the United States? And so basically they are saying that there might actually be...
Well, he may already have, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that I think that the scenario presented by Call of Duty Black Ops in that particular shoot-'em-up video game, where they're showing basically something very similar, and you have airborne drones, seaborne drones, landborne drones, and basically an entire robotic army that is meant for an automated battlefield without American troops. And what they don't tell you is the rationalization behind that, which is, of course, nobody, obviously what I just told you is the military is less than 1% of the U.S. population. It's going to get even smaller. Nobody's joining the military, and with very good reason, and I hope that I'm a major factor in that decruiting process. And ultimately, what the Americans are saying is we just can't afford the manpower. We have no manpower to enforce either police state on foreign or domestic lands. So let's go into basically investing more and more into higher technology, automated killing machines, and take it from there. Of course, in Call of Duty Black Ops, the automated assembly line version, everything goes haywire. The enemy gets the keys in terms of codes, and basically turns all of the machines against the American public. And it's up to you as a first-person shooter to start wrecking machinery. Well, all of that is indeed possible. Nothing's impossible. The DOMs, the deep underground military bases, conceivably could be equipped with automated assembly line plants that are basically run by artificial intelligences. And if everybody dies, then those things underground can just keep churning things out. Now, I don't feel that's going to happen. The reason why is I personally knew somebody who was a brilliant antisocial geek, nerd, gamer. This dude, basically, if it weren't for the fact that he inherited a home in the middle of a combat zone in Ohio, he basically would be homeless right now. He's one of the most overeducated people that I know, and the term overeducated does apply. You can be overeducated just like you can be overgunned. You give a .44 Magnum to a woman who's 5 feet tall, and if she fires that gun, she's just going to break her nose, create hairline fractures in her face with the recoil because it'll bounce right out of her hand. It's going to leave a blood pattern of those neural grooves from the handle in just basically imprinted into the palms of her hands. I'm not exaggerating that you can be overgunned. That's not going to help anybody. That'll leave you open and vulnerable to whoever's coming after you. It's the same thing with education. You can be overeducated. There is such a thing as too much information or too much of a good thing. And in the case of this individual, his education was in information systems technology, specializing in artificial intelligence, and he was also an electronics engineer. Now, to put this in perspective for you, engineering has a set of ranks where they believe that the stupidest or the dumbest engineers are civil engineers. Then the next ones up on the respect list are essentially like chemical engineers, and then the ones up at the top of the list are like electronics engineers. And so he was at the top of the top in terms of the electronic engineering, combined with his artificial intelligence knowledge. What did he use it for? He combined it into a double major and a degree specializing in artificial intelligence manipulated automated assembly systems. So he couldn't get a job to save his soul. This guy basically went to NASA, and they said, look, clown, we're just a welfare state for engineers. We're just a permanent employment program for all the old boys network of engineers that existed years ago. We don't do anything. Are you crazy?
Did he try to go work for the quote-unquote shadow government? Did he, like, walk into skunk works?
This is the point, Mr. Travesty. No one tries to work for the government. It's like somebody says, I want to join Delta Force. Or somebody says, I want to be a ranger. Now, unless things have changed radically for decades, nobody said, I want to be a ranger, or you could say that, but nobody, there was no recruiting offices for them. Like, hey, I don't want to go through the regular military. I want to go straight.
Well, right, you have to be the best of the best of the best kind of thing.
Then they drag you into the Rangers. Then they drag you into Special Forces.
Right.
See, that's the way it worked for decades. Now,
I thought that in the science community it was different. Like, if you could prove that you had this application, you had a chance.
Oh, yeah, then they come for you. That's my point. No one ever came for this SOB. This poor guy was going everywhere. He was passing out his resume everywhere. He went to agribusiness. First he went to NASA, like I said. They turned him down because they're nothing other than a permanent employment program for technicians, old ones at that. And when they all retire, NASA disappears. End of story. Then he went over to industry and said, how about automated assembly lines for the cars? We don't need any employees at all. That was a big fear throughout the 70s was, oh, automation's going to get your job. And they just laughed at him and said, dude, we're not even producing cars anymore. The Japanese and the Germans produce, double on the part of the Germans than us, quadruple on the part of the Japanese than us. We're going out of business, and we're just turning ourselves over to the government, and we're going to get on corporate welfare, and they'll have to pay us just to keep some people employed so all these people don't become homeless. It's just a welfare state for corporocracy and for the people working. Get out of here. And then he went to agribusiness. And he said, oh, hey, I can, do all this automated picking machines and harvesting machines, and we can turn it into an assembly line operation. You don't need illegal immigrants. It'll be hygienic. It'll be, whatever. And the reason I say that is because illegal immigrants are notorious. Here in the state of California, the overwhelming majority of food in the world comes, a good deal of it, from the state of California. And the state of California is also notorious for the majority of cholera cases and various food infections that come to the rest of the United States from lettuce and salads that are shipped out of California. This is because the illegal immigrants are kept in housing and they are not given outhouses or johns. They literally relieve themselves fecally and in terms of urine in the field. Yes. And they use those vegetables to wipe themselves. And they bring their babies with them. They bring their babies with them, and they wipe their babies' butts with the spinach because it's got the most grip on it for fecal matter, and they just throw that in with everything else. All that spreads the cholera, and everybody comes down with it multiple times a year, and people die. Nobody reports it because the entire industry is based on illegal immigrants. Now, he was thinking he could eliminate all this. And they said, go to hell. That's our version of fertilizer. We get human fertilizer now from all those people out there. The point that I'm making with agribusiness at that time was that they just basically said it'll be cheaper to have illegal immigrants working in the field. Literally, you know what they eat? He said, no, what do they eat? He said, they eat what we grow. They just eat it in the field. That's what they're fed. This is cheaper than anything you're proposing. And he went to other industries and they told him, go to hell because we're sending all of what we build down south. Yeah, so my point is that's never going to happen. Because if the government were doing that with deep underground military bases, they would have dragged him in. He would have disappeared into a black op. I never would have seen him again. He's spending the rest of his life at home, unemployable, playing video games. So there you have it.
All right.
The government didn't take him down there into a deep underground military bunker. So as far as I'm concerned, there's none down there because it doesn't matter how many geniuses they had working out before. They always need new blood if you've got an ongoing project. You know what I mean? You always need new blood if you've got an ongoing project to improve, to innovate, to keep something moving. They don't have any of that. So what you need to work with is the threat of something like the zombie apocalypse. Far more possible, far more potential, because government was working on that for years and for very specific reasons. And as we go into the second hour, a lot of what we talk about should be devoted to that because of here goes something that they are purposefully getting you into the meme of the mimetic.
Do they have the biological mix perfected yet where they could start people turning into zombies, or are the zombies that we think of entirely just metaphors for some other condition altogether which would end up being the masses coming at you?
Well, the masses coming at you is ultimately what may very well result from experiments that have been conducted throughout centuries. Now, for centuries, there existed zombie and zombieism. And zombie, by the way, is both a singular and a plural. Like the Japanese word kamikaze, there's no such thing as kamikazes. It's either a singular or a plurality, just like the term zombie in the Haitian Creole. And the Haitian Creole, the zombie is Z-O-M-B-I. Now, when you add the Z-O-M-B-I-E onto it, that is a modern neologism. And the neologism was developed for a feral zombie, and zombie being Z-O-M-B-I. Now, zombie meant person without volition, person without will, somebody being used for labor to work the cane fields in Haiti, and other places throughout Pan America. Now, that is a zombie. When it becomes feral, when it starts attacking anything and anyone like a shark smelling blood, then you add the E on the end, and it's called a zombie. Then you can put the S on the end for plurals. Okay, that's a neologism. Now, how did we wind up developing this neologism? Now, none of that makes any sense. Well, it got developed because of actual incidents. Now, and what people found out. Now, the Valjohudons powder, the zombie powder, or the voodoo powder, the components were the topic of much speculation, and it was a U.S. government doctor who was sent down to investigate it originally well before Edmund Wade Davis, who was famous for writing the book The Serpent and the Rainbow, and actually wrote an academic textbook, much more informative, much more pertinent, titled The Ethnobiology of the Haitian Zombie. Now, which very few people know about. Serpent and the Rainbow is basically a novelization of his experience. The ethnobotany of the Haitian zombie is the science. And very technical, very difficult to read, fairly inaccessible to the lay public.
Here's the important question when it pertains to defensibleness. The zombies that they are, is there a film or series like Walking Dead or whatever that would be the most accurate just to the behavior, to what to expect? Are you defending yourself against slow-moving masses? Is it going to be like this movie World War Z coming out where they're just charging at you like a stampeding thing that can stack on top of each other? Or is it like going to be like Resident Evil where they're sort of like biomutants? What scenarios are people going to have to think about if they deploy this madness upon the masses?
Well, the reason all of those variants are being proposed is because all of those variants are possible. You're going to get a combination thereof. Now, the biomutants is a bit far-fetched, but it's certainly possible. But it would take a series of incredibly fortuitous or unlucky, as opposed to fortuitous, but highly unusual circumstances to lead to the point where Monsanto / Umbrella Corporation is unleashing the biozombies. Now, what would instead be a danger would be the Terminator seed, which, of course, would conceivably, this is always a potential, eliminate all normal organic growth and replace it with vegetation that is self-programmed to auto-destruct and die off, which creates a universal famine. And that leads to cannibalism right then and there. So that is a potential that they're also trying to acclimate us to through all of these films. Also, another example of a potential, I don't believe this is going to happen, of Monsanto going wrong, / Umbrella, would be The Last of Us, which is a new video game about the fungus that grows out of people, because fungus does grow on people, and fungus has been an enemy of armies for many years. There is an actual textbook, an actual academic textbook written prior to the Second World War. I believe it was published between World War I and World War II, called Man Against the Fungi. And this is not a novel. It's not science fiction. It was one of the reasons why H.G. Wells made the Martians of his invasion. He portrayed them as fungus. And but Man Against the Fungi is an actual medical textbook which talks about the effect of fungus on armies and how it can impede them and their progress. So in terms of what we had with the zombie, or the ZOMBI, what happened was there was a prominent psychopharmacologist, the only two-time winner of the Albert Lasker Award for Clinical Medical Research, an award known as America's Nobel Prize, who had, with Manfred Clynes, co-coined the term cyborg back in 1960. And they first used the phrase in an article published in Astronautics magazine about the advantages of self-regulating humanic machine systems in outer space. Now, he wound up working in Haiti, or Haiti. Haiti is simply the Haitian Creole for land of mountains, for 30 years, assuming a central role in establishing Le Centre de Psychologie et Neurologie Mars Klein, the Mars Klein Center of Psychology and Neurology. Now, when we get back from break time, I'm going to rush to the bathroom, by the way. When we get back, we'll continue with what can happen from that.
So we've been talking about aspects of militia preparedness, primarily putting things into perspective with our fears about what kind of technology can be used against us when in the hands of less than life-favoring individuals, shall we say. There was another incredible possibility, which is Project Bluebeam. So, Doug, why don't you tell us a little bit about the whole Project Bluebeam angle that somebody that would want to be in a militia is going to have to worry about?
Well, the Project Bluebeam angle is, of course, a disinformation campaign. We have disinformation government shills who I have identified and outed, who I am not going to name. There's no point going into it right now. All people need to do is go to the Conspiracy Con, where I was one of the speakers, and they can look at the speakers panel. You can purchase that on DVD. That's the responsibility of Brian William Hall, who basically has a handle on those DVDs. He's not releasing them to the internet or uploading them. That's not to say someone who purchases to those DVDs will not ultimately do so. But as far as I know, none of them are up there. But you can see the speakers panel where I am outing someone who is frontally attacking me, who happens to be one of those shills. Now, he wrote a book called AD, or After Disclosure. That alone says it all. You are being primed and prepped for a so-called disclosure of a very, shall we say, kind of falsified government alien invasion. The reality is that the ufological experience is quite real. It's been parallel to the human existence for as long as recorded history and before. But the idea of that ufological experience suddenly turning hostile and nasty, I'm not saying that the universe is full of love and light. It's a very violent universe. We can see that through the physics of it. But the reality is the U.S. government fed everything it could about DNA and various aspects of the Drake equation, everything that they could into analyzing the universe around us, and they came to the conclusion, that doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but they came to the conclusion there is no alien life. There is no one in this universe other than us, that the visits, much of what we are experiencing in terms of abductions, that those that are not my lab, they feel are basically people from the future who are our descendants who populate that universe, and at that point have evolved so differently, so radically, to so many different environments, as well as genetically created so many different drones of various animal compositions in terms of genetics to work in zero-gravity environments, heavy gravity environments, etc., that it looks like any number of different alien races. But as for now, everything we see in terms of conventional light, conventional radio, all the full electromagnetic spectrum going back to, as far as we can, all we can do is see the past. Everything we see from Alpha Centauri, our nearest neighbor, is 4 years ago. Everything we see into the past, it's empty. There is nothing. It is total silence, dead silence, empty silence. There is nothing out there that is producing anything on the level that we've interpreted as communications. That's the basis for their logic. And one can argue, oh, it's some exotic wave. Well, you know, that's physically, literally physically impossible. There's nothing out there in the physical realm that we see. Gravity, anything along the electromagnetic spectrum, nothing is coming out in a pattern sense of communication. So if anyone, for instance, our own Earth, basically the year Emperor Hirohito was born, who is a predominant figure of the Second World War, was 1901, and that is when Marconi sent out that little letter S with a radio transmission into space, basically simply by making that radio transmission. That little letter S, like in the movie Contact, is at the edge of a shell of radio waves that now covers the equivalent of 90,000 light years, because radio waves go at the speed of light. And our entire little planet is now, in terms of radiographic spectrometry, something like millions of times brighter than our sun. So if there were anyone in the universe just playing a radio, and think about this, think about what I'm saying, our most powerful planetary exploration radars are already 10 billion times brighter than the sun in radiography. So to external observers, our planet has erupted like a radio volcano. We outshine the sun in the radio portion of the spectrum, and basically, as I said, because they go at the speed of light, these waves have encompassed a sphere of 9,000 stars. So if anyone were out in the universe, we'd see it. It'd be like somebody playing a boombox who lived next door. And there's no way you could hide it. Your biggest problem would be trying to filter out those alien transmissions so you could hear your radio program with Steve Travesty. So none of that is out there. So whatever invasion they have is going to be fake. So you'll be dealing with human technology technology you can comprehend, then that's technology you can take on. And anybody who tells you disclosure is coming is working for the government and on their side and trying to promote a falsehood to delude you into it's aliens and they're too much for us to handle. You'd better surrender. You'd better give up. They've got millions of years on us in evolution. It's all a lie. So what I was saying about the zombies, now that's a totally different reason that is based in real science and has turned into something that they're worried will develop into a plague. What we are dealing with was, as I said, we had the man who developed a psychology in Haiti and established its only psychiatric institute, as a matter of fact. There's only one in the entire Haiti nation in the capital, and this individual was a psychopharmacologist, and he was working with cybernetics for space travel. And the individual's name, again, Dr. Nathan S. Klein. And as a psychopharmacologist, he was somebody who basically was trying to find a way to put men into a death-like coma as astronauts so that they could travel all the way out to the end of the solar system, Pluto, which would take decades and decades, if not hundreds of years, and come out of it alive. They wouldn't need to eat or sleep or defecate or expel gases. They would be, for all intents and purposes, dead, reanimated at the other end, and then get dead again, come back home. So he was planning on such projects back when we had a serious space program. That's why he was 30 years down in Haiti studying zombism. And that's why he called down Edmund Wade Davis and to buy the zombie powder for him to work with and analyze pharmacologically, because it's illegal in Haiti. Since zombies are real, it is illegal to manufacture them. And as a result, he hired Edmund Wade Davis to be a criminal. And that man, against all of Haiti's laws, purchased zombie powder in the same manner that you and I would buy crack from a crack dealer, and ultimately smuggled it out of Haiti to pharmaceutical industries so that they could synthesize it. And so what he conducted was drug smuggling. Now, biological researchers have since created dead zombie cells in the lab which outperform living cells. Seriously. And this is at Sandia National Laboratories. And the whole purpose was the University of New Mexico, by the way, was cooperating with this. So we're talking about all Roswell territory. They innovated a technique whereby mammalian cells are coated with silica to form near-perfect replicas. And the silica replicants can survive greater pressures and temperatures than human flesh. And they perform many of the functions better than the original cells did when they were alive. So by painting the cells with silicic acid in a petri dish, the acid embalms the organic matter in the cell down to the nanomatter level, down to the nanometer. And the silica then acts as a permeable armor. Now, this is according to Michael Hess at the American Office of Public Affairs.
I'm getting that you've got like this interesting kind of bio armor. It's basically like an undead second skin that you're putting on. Now, is this going to, as far as it relates to the quote-unquote zombie apocalypse, is that something that would become administratively something that turns you into a zombie? Is that like a side effect of wearing it?
Well, it tends to work when the cell is already dead and then reanimates the cell. That is one way that it is interpreted as a function. That means the cell beneath can be used as a catalyst at far greater temperatures than normal because a living cell could not tolerate it. Heating the silica to around 400 degrees Celsius evaporates the protein in the cell, which kills it, but leaves the silica as a three-dimensional replica of the formerly living cell or the being which those cells compose. So the difference is that instead of modeling the face, say, of a famous criminal, the hardened silica-based cells display internal mineralized structures with intricate features ranging from nano to millimeter length scales. So this is considered an invaluable biological material that can thus be converted into a reusable fossil, which could be used in fuel cells, decontamination, sensor technology, as well as commercial manufacturing. Now, the lead researcher of the project, his name is Brian Kaehr, K-A-E-H-R, and he said in a statement that research distinguishes between a mummy cell and a zombie cell in this project. Our zombie cells, this is the term he uses, bridge chemistry and biology to create forms that not only near perfectly resemble their past selves, but can do future work. So this is not automation that you need to worry about. Here's the connection. There was a poor young lady named Terry Schindler-Shivo, who I know all of you might remember. Well, Terry Schindler-Shivo's case was remarkably pertinent because she went into what was a aware, comatic, functioning coma. That means she was entirely aware of everything that was happening to her whenever her husband, who poisoned her, went in to the hospital where she was kept on life support and taunted her. And all the nurses would say after he left the room, her stats would go through the sky, blood pressure way up, she'd be diaphoretic, pale, in absolute terror because he went in there to constantly terrorize her. And the nurses insisted that she was very similar to Rom Hubin. There is a man whose name is Romhoubens, and Rom Hubens was a fully functional victim of a car accident who was declared legally dead and in vegetative state, and it took a Dutch neuroscientist to use state-of-the-art imaging technology to prove his brain was fully functional and he understood everything that was going on around him in the hospital but could do nothing about it while all the doctors were telling his parents to pull the plug for 10 years. Now, because the parents kept him alive through that period of time, that neurophysicist was able to ultimately help him enter a stage of rehabilitation. Now, that could have happened with Terry Schindler-Shivo in the United States, but it went up to the governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, who could have given her a gubernatorial pardon and ordered something like that pursued, but he ordered her killed. Now, why? The reason why is because the Terry Schindler-Shivo case is a legal precedent for when your brain ceases to function as defined as a living human being the way we set the definition, you are legally dead and have no rights and we can kill you. Now, the reason that's so important is because she is the legal precedent for zombie labor. If they have every right to kill you, they now have every right to use you as slave labor. So now, all of the Haitians that were, say, for instance, used by the U.S. government. Give you an example. During the American Civil War, the United States government invaded and occupied an island off of Haiti, which belonged by the state constitution of Haiti to Haiti itself. This island, Navassa Island, basically was invaded by the U.S., and they brought hundreds of black slaves there because slavery was still legal until 1865. They worked them to death and beyond because they experimented with the zombie powder as applied by the Haitians on these black slaves. And ultimately, when they were done working with them, they locked them in the bowels of Navassa Island, and it is now off limits to anyone other than the U.S. Coast Guard and scientists who the Department of the Interior allows inside. And to make sure no one goes near it, they claimed it as part of the United States, even though it's separated from the U.S. by Cuba, Jamaica, and Haiti. It is considered part of the United States. The Americans occupy it, and they put it under the Department of the Interior, which is responsible for coastal islands like Catalina Island off the state of California, as if it were right off our border. So the United States now technically and legally shares borders, maritime borders, with Haiti and Jamaica and Cuba. It's right south of Guantanamo Bay, and for 12 nautical miles stretching out from the coast of that island, the U.S. Coast Guard has orders to shoot to kill if you come near that island. And they'll probably escort you away, but if you were insistent, you were trying to break on that island, they do have the state-induced authority to kill you. So what's on that island? And we know what was on it. Hundreds of African-American slaves that were experimented on with the zombie powder and worked to death before the end of the American Civil War. Now, they, since they were dead anyway, might still be down there in the mines. That is the situation that we're dealing with. Now,
are we talking about individuals that are effectively brain dead and yet they still can perform basic motor functions?
Well, let me give you an example. Jean Wilbrun Williamson, he was the Haitian prime minister, or he was the minister of war originally, then he became Haiti's president. He was going to invade Navassa Island and take it back. And basically, he was attacked by a crowd of people in his offices. And this crowd of people was like animals. They were feral. They were beyond control. They were shot multiple times. They wouldn't go down. They dragged him out of his offices and tore him apart limb from limb and ate him.
Okay.
And that was how he died.
Okay.
And that was when he died on basically July 1915. So
were these did these guys move fast or slow?
These guys were fast.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the whole point is that what the Americans have now, based on the Terry Schindler-Schiavo case, is legal precedent. If your brain doesn't go functioning and you're basically rendered as fairly immortal and can survive high temperatures through the silica of the zombie cells that they created, they've got a labor force that can withstand working in extreme high temperatures like the middle of nuclear furnaces and power plants. And because these people are dead, they don't need to eat, and they have no rights because Terry Schindler-Schiavo had no rights. They can kill you anytime they want, so they can work you anytime they want. So you're a fully functioning brain trapped in this body, and you're being used as slave labor. You've lost your will, you've lost your volition, and eventually the U.S. government can work you until they want and then kill you if they want. And you have no rights based on the laws of the United States because of the Terry Schindler-Schiavo precedent. You are dead. You are legally non-existent. None of the rights, none of the laws apply to you. You are a slave. So that brings back legal slavery to the United States. Now, why do they want to do this? Because they are convinced, based on the kind of ecological and environmental advice from their advisors, they are convinced by people like Dr. Peter Ward that we are going to have a monumental disaster that is going to render the world fairly deoxygenated. Basically, what happened is we have a situation where 5 times in the past there's been 500,000 years of ice cycles, and the ice layers display oxygen and carbon dioxide starved levels. None of these show iridium from asteroids or melted tektite, meaning that it wasn't bolides that was killing life on the planet. It was because the carbon dioxide levels have been much higher than now. The Permian extinction was the worst. 200 million years ago, 97% of all life and 90% of all species of the 5 big main extinctions died off due to anoxic oceans. Anoxic means without oxygen. So, basically, we have a situation where cyclically we have a situation where the oxygen on our planet disappears. So why is this happening? When they investigate this, they find out there's volcanism in the oceans. And it's so important to emphasize the fact that the currents keep the oceans oxygenated, and all oceans have oxygen except the Black Sea. Stagnation leads to anaerobic or non-oxygen breathing bacteria. And the anaerobic bacteria produces hydrosulfide, so toxic that they are the cause of the Permian and other mass extinctions. So the ice ages prevent this. So that's why we're trying to create an ice age with the chemtrails. In the meantime, if you remove the ice caps, then the anoxic oceans result, like the Black Sea, in hydrosulfide bubbles that are produced by anaerobic bacteria that cause all the mass extinctions. Now, as a backup plan, they have created, based on the fact that carbon dioxide, coincident with mass extinction, no one dies from CO2. Heavy CO2 produces anoxic oceans, which is a habitat for zero oxygen photosynthetic bacteria. These produce hydrosulfide gas, which can kill animals at variable susceptibility levels, but the land plants got it first in the Permian, and that created a huge wedge, just a biomass of dead botanicals, which goes into the sea. Then the oceans die off because there's no more phosphate or nitrate runoff from the land. Then all you have is a cycle where basically you have entropic anoxic oceans. Now, here's an example. In 1986, you've got an entropic anoxic lake created as active volcanoes were going off within Lake Nyos, Naiyos, in the Cameroon, in Africa. And they pumped carbon dioxide into the water. They nurtured anaerobic bacteria, which doesn't need oxygen, cannot live with oxygen. That's why they blow the zombies' brains out, is because that exposes the brains and the anoxic bacteria to oxygen instantly, and they all die. The warm water gets trapped as a cold gas at the bottom. Well, it all burst in a carbon dioxide bubble, and in Lake Nyos in the Cameroon in 1986, tens of thousands of cattle died, and 3,000 people died in a single night, 1,700 of them instantly, because all of that oxygen was sucked out of the sky. Now, that can happen on a global level. We have a giant version of Lake Nyos in the Black Sea, and most of our oceans along the coast are becoming anoxic. So the environmental scientists have convinced the elite we need to create an ice age to slow this down, and we need to create a race of the undead that don't need to breathe, that can survive in a world without oxygen.
That's sick. In a word. So would there literally be no oxygen, or would it be a depleted oxygen? Like, what are the typical survival odds if you're somebody like, say, our station producer like Nighthawk, who like does farming and things like that, and like how much prepping would it take to deal with that reality? Because let me tell you something. You watch Real Prepper Solutions on TV, I don't think they're talking about prepping for an oxygenless society. They're just talking about economy crash.
Well, hydrogen sulfide is created by microbes, which are a water molecule with sulfur in the middle that can dissolve oxygen. That Namibia was one of the worst H2S hydrogen sulfide hotspots in what's now called, it used to be called the Ivory Coast, the Gold Coast, all those romantic names for the slave days. Now it's called the Skeleton Coast. And there's several skeleton coasts off Africa and other places of the world that are now anaerobic. The Congo is an area of oceanic concentration, and it's rich in the upwelling of big nutrients caused by sardine fish die-offs, which have all depleted from overfishing. Phytoplankton has suffered mass death resulting from the lack of fish food, and it's visible from space as a hydrosulfide pool. So this is a calm world that we're heading towards, especially if the Gulf current dies due to the melting of the ice caps from, say, Greenland, or the melting of the ice caps, which is happening in the North Pole. That cuts down the current, which is known as the Gulf Stream, which warms Britain, which warms Europe, and basically when you remove the ice caps, anoxic oceans result like the Black Sea area. And then the hydrosulfide bubbles come up, and if that big bubble, the global model of it that's been modeled, comes out of the Black Sea, it is basically, as what happened in the last several times that we've had these mass extinction events, those bubbles are highly flammable. They float over continents, lightning strikes them, and they set the continent on fire. If that one single giant methane bubble escapes from the bottom of the Black Sea, because it's kept down there at the bottom, because it sinks to the bottom because of the temperature differential, when it rises due to stagnation, that could float over China, lightning strikes it, and you've just annihilated 500 million people. That's the kind of situation that we're speaking of as a regularity that was every day for, millions of years in these mass extinction cycle events. That is why they're not even thinking of the human race surviving. They're thinking of creating a race of the undead to carry on the human.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a race of the undead to support the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. Because at that point, it doesn't sound like you're going to even have room for like a quote-unquote aristocratic class. You're just going to have like the overseers, effectively. It's just like we've been having this kind of industrial revolution, which has led to our technology age the way that we have. And it's been, for the most part, just the last 100 or so years. And it's kind of strange that we've had this explosion of tech at seemingly the last minute. It's suspicious to me that we've had this explosion of tech that seems to work out just great for them and just horrible for us.
Well, I would recommend that, first off, you learn to accept the fact that everything I'm giving you is what they're planning for, doesn't mean it's going to happen. Yeah. Well, that's a good start. Well, first off, the next mass extinction should not be here for 250 million years, but that's based on cosmological cycles of the orbit of our brown dwarf star, our dark binary star companion, which has been referred to as Nemesis. Now, there's a lot of controversy about this.
Are you basing that on your government intel? What are you basing you telling us the acceptance of our second sun theory as valid?
Yeah, that is basically government intel. There's several things that that used to be common knowledge, by the way. It used to be common knowledge taught in school when older people were growing up in the 1950s. It used to be common knowledge that they pointed out the fact that the overwhelming majority of stars in the galaxy were binary stars. So the common evolution of stars is to create binary star companions. So it was assumed our sun was a binary star. Now, that biased our government into researching in that direction. So what the government concluded was when they look on various levels of the light spectrum that are not normally used, they essentially almost double the number of stars in our galaxy. And because of that, they feel that it's fairly certain we've got a brown dwarf companion star, very difficult to see, that goes through the Kuiper belt, not the Oort cloud, but the Kuiper belt, about once every 500 million years, and basically is the trigger for the mass extinctions, not because it sends any planetary bodies within the solar system proper, the planet X-30, all that stuff. That has nothing to do with that spectacular nonsense. It just means that it creates a horrible disequilibrium in the Kuiper belt that's even worse because it sends asteroids, bolides, planetoids into the inner system that essentially pelt our Earth, that help aid the mass extinctions that apparently coincide with extreme volcanism on Earth that already depletes the oxygen, but it's really the depletion of the oxygen, not the bolide strikes, that kills us. So why they're assuming the mass extinction might happen sooner than calculated at 250 million years is because the environmental scientists that are their advisors are convincing them that what we are experiencing with the anoxic oceans and the creation of further and further anaerobic bacteria through the anoxic oceans is going to make a volcanic deoxygenation incident occur prior by hundreds of millions of years to that orbit of this binary star, which is in a highly elliptic orbit.
Is anything about this star going to be in the visual spectrum at all?
Well, no, and it's not going to impact us, like I said, for 250 million years. It's the only reason I bring it up is to show that it's not part of the equation.
Okay.
Yeah, but rather what you're preparing for is something different, something terrestrial, and let's talk about some of the practical aspects of it. I don't believe the world is going to be entirely deoxygenated. They're preparing for the absolute worst-case scenario. They are really far more intent on financing these mad scientists for the sake of perfecting a non-complaining labor force that they don't have to pay, that they don't have to feed, that doesn't need sleep cycles, a 24-hour-a-day automated system based on biology. That's what they're trying to develop. And so that could go wrong in any number of ways, the primary being prions, which is a totally different subject. We don't want to go into that right now, but that is what would lead to feral zombies. Prion is an acronym for proteinaceous infectious ion. And that is what would lead the zombie, Z-O-M-B-I, and turn them into zombies, Z-O-M-B-I-E, with an S, if they're plural. Okay, so that's the point. Now, what do we do in a situation like that? Well, you go instantly back to the Middle Ages because society collapses, and suddenly middle-age technology becomes the key to defending yourself. Now, unknown to most Americans, there are literally many castles in the United States. There are over 70 castles in New England. There are that many again in New York State alone. There are about 30 castles each in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and there's 25 in Illinois. So that's about 225 militarily registered, actual, honest-to-God, no bullshit castles with their own water system. They're not fairy tale castles like at Disneyland. These are actual defensible castles. They were built by eccentric millionaires, reactionary prison architects, and occasionally genuine European aristocrats throughout the United States.
And these castles are castles, like King Arthur's, like it's a big fort and the king lives in the fort kind of castle.
Yes, they were all built before the 1930s when the United States government made it illegal.
Okay.
Because without any nearby artillery or government, their potential truly blossoms, and whoever is master of that castle is master of the land.
Hmm. You see, I was always gunning for the max security prison, like season 3 of Walking Dead.
Well, they want to take your attention away from something like this to something like that, because at that point you're contending with all the inmates that you have to fight for that prison.
That's what they do in like the first episode. It's like they seize the they have to seize it, so they have to take out all the zombies in there, plus the resident inmates that didn't turn Walker.
Well, there you go. And the whole point is, why go through that when, if you have the money, you can purchase one of these castles? Now, if you don't, then what we're dealing with is a situation where you definitely are faced with the fact that very few people can farm to sustain themselves. And the people who know how to do that, such as the Pennsylvania Amish, are basically going to be taken out instantly by roving biker gangs, because they don't believe in war and they don't believe in resistance. So your best bet is to hang out with people like that as their defense. And then they feed. That is, otherwise, you and I and your average American, we're never going to be able to grow any food to sustain ourselves through year after year after year. Now, I'll give you an example. That dude I told you about who was unemployable because he was overeducated and is now confined the rest of his life to playing video games in the destitute, rundown home without a roof over the garage that he inherited from his grandparents, and without which he'd be homeless. Yeah. Now, this individual, basically, his mom, who is now sadly deceased, was once dating a man, and he asked the guy, the guy was asking, what do you do? And, of course, he told him all his sad story, and the guy laughed at him. And so he said, in self-defense, well, what do you do? And the guy said, I'm a survivalist. And he couldn't get it. He was asking me about that. What does he mean, I'm a survivalist? He said it like it was a job. And I said, that's what it is. If you truly are a survivalist, that's your career. There's really no such thing as an effective, like, oh, I actually work for a living, but as a side, I'm kind of dabbling in prepping, because that's not going to cut it. If you don't go all out, balls to the wall, you'd have to be either so rich that you can afford to go the road warrior lifestyle and start armoring your vehicle, you're starting to dig your own well, you're starting to do all this good stuff that gives you sustenance, mainly in terms of water more than anything else. If you don't have the money to do that, then you're screwed. Or if you're so poor that you've been doing that all the time anyway, then you're set. So you either got to be really rich or really poor, because really poor people, like the homeless, have been doing that forever anyway. Now, the majority of the homeless are going to die too, because the majority of the homeless are parasitizing off of urban water pipes. They're parasitizing off of all kinds of urban infrastructure that they're not paying for, living in subways, living off of, living in manholes, that kind of stuff.
They're surviving off of the unsupervised aspects of the infrastructure of a successful economy, or sustained economy.
Well, or disintegrating economy.
Well, it's disintegrating now, correct, yeah. Yeah.
But in terms of putting this into perspective, what you are going to be dealing with after billions of people die worldwide and millions of people die in the United States, and these city-states are literally going to be what we would consider today to be dead cities. They're going to be essentially mayoralties, and their population is going to be literally 5% to 30%, if they're lucky, of their pre-fall population. So larger cities like Chicago would probably have something like a population of about 3 million, and initially, which would quickly die off. I'm not talking about now. They've got millions now. It would die off quickly to something far smaller. And basically, towards the lower end of the ratio, you're going to get all kinds of basically empty towers, which are going to be used to grow food. And they're going to have every level with hydroponic gardens to grow food in abandoned skyscrapers. You're going to see the greening of the cities, people living off of this, and you're going to see them guarded by militia. So you're going to see these paramilitary mayoral guards develop where you're going to have probably, like Chicago, again, as an example, one of the larger cities of the mayoralties.
I can see Rahm Emanuel using them, too.
Yeah. They'd have a population of just over 200,000. And they would control a rural population, including several smaller towns like Gary, Indiana, and Aurora, Illinois. Probably a rural population of about 1.8 million or close to 2 million. And that rural population would be doing a great deal to feed the other 200,000 that are in the city. So you'd have a Chicago police force, which would essentially be a military. That'd probably be only about 600 men. And they'd bolster it, or hamper it, if you would, by about 150 mayoral guardsmen and about several different types of mercenaries. And they'd have ward police, of course. They'd deputize people of about 50 to 100 men each. And then they'd institute a draft if they needed to go to war with other cities. Now, all of this was calculated by think tanks years ago when I was trying to transfer into RAND, MIT, and various think tank corporations. And these are statistics that were never released to the public, but they were basing everything on economy of scale, that after a major societal collapse, suddenly all of the coal mines that are considered tapped out would be considered chock full when they're supporting a population that has a fly speck compared to the population they were supporting before.
Right.
So
I mean, also, like they kind of hinted at all this stuff, like in Doctor Strangelove. They have a scene towards the end where Doctor Strangelove is calculating how America would rebuild itself after the nuclear war goes off, because they realized it was an inevitability at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's what was going on here, but it wasn't based on nuclear war, because much of what we're told about nuclear war is fantasy and a fallacy. Nobody expected nuclear war, because the reality was the majority of American and Soviet scientists knew that many of the nuclear ICBMs, the intercontinental slingshots, what they were going to throw at each other, were not going to work. They just knew that it was all jury-rigged. It was all, if they pushed the button to launch it, a high percentage of chance would probably have it explode in the silo. A lot of them would just go up and they knew this. They knew this. It was all just a scam.
So basically, the idea of, there's a silo somewhere, somebody launches a nuclear ICBM or whatever, it's so freaking volatile that it would just blow up in your face with such great degree of likelihood that nobody's really interested in pressing the button just because you'd blow yourself up.
Pretty much. That was pretty much the balance of terror, and that was the stupidity of it. In terms of the Soviets, that was their scam on their own population to keep the Communist Party in power. In terms of the Americans, it was their scam that still keeps them in power. In terms of the Constitutional Republic, in terms of the Soviets, everybody found out because everybody was drinking, everybody was talking. The men running the silos had the highest suicide rates in the world, and finally it all leaked out and the Soviet Union collapsed. That was their economy. They did not have a military-industrial complex. They were a military-industrial complex. Their entire existence economically was based on building missiles and their strategic rocket forces, maintaining their military, and it all turned out to be a scam, and they collapsed. And that is essentially what the Americans got going. We're supposedly the world's best defended third world nation. Well, we haven't been able to do anything in terms of security. Your military does not stop the illegal invasion of immigrants from Mexico. And these people aren't even, for the most part, armed. And they're flowing in. Yeah, so all of the money you're spending is worthless. You're not getting any defense. 9/11 proved that. And, of course, a lot of this is inside jobs. It's an inside job with the corporations who need the illegal migrant labor. It's an inside job with the Americans in terms of 9/11. But my point still holds. This place can be taken out in a heartbeat by anyone who's determined to do so. So electromagnetic pulse, etc. I've gone into that in past shows. We'll probably go into that in another one at some point in the future. I might have you a guest on my show while we discuss these things. Might be a better way of handling it because of the hours. But I do want to say that one of the best things you can do is to become friendly with everyone in your community. If you live in a city, prepare towards a kind of need to convert the skyscrapers in your city into agricultural hydroponic gardens. Now, this sounds absurd, but then you realize The majority of our population lives in cities.
You know what? Most people want to do that now, regardless of prepping. They want to do that in the hopes of still being a first world country because they like the idea so much. Because at the very least, it makes food cheaper and it makes the city look cleaner. And people really like that, and it's good for the morale of the people. And, you know, if I was a politician, I'd be like, hell yeah, if I didn't have a handler telling me keep these people poor and working and, you know, all that crap. I say do it.
Absolutely. And in the end, the cities become very feudal. They become, people are going to be swearing allegiance to their mayor. That is going to be their government. That is going to be the norm in the United States in the future. We're going to have now look at this. This is true libertarianism. When you look at, I'm sorry, go on.
No, I'm just saying, I like it. Hey, as long as your city actually, like, you know, treats people right, dude, city-states, why the hell not? I mean, we already act like that. You know, you blow up Boston and all of a sudden the suburbs are crawling with tanks. Why? Because the suburbs support the city.
Well, you know, there you go. And the point that I'm making is that you are going to have, obviously, with that many cities, you're going to have different types of government. Each one of them will bring out the best and worst in their population. You're going to have multiple cities that are going to be just exclusive. Some of them are going to be black only. Some of them are going to be white only. A great deal of them will be much more cosmopolitan and host people of multiple ethnicities and, of course, also mixed race births. And imagine like 1,000 Hong Kongs and 1,000 Singapores, and you've got an economy that is truly much better than what you had before. Because Hong Kong and Singapore are wealthy enough as cities to afford, MRI machines, to afford medical treatment, to afford, as in the case of Singapore, their own military. So this is what's going to happen. National Guard Air Force jets being confiscated, defending the airspace of a local city, large ones like New York or Austin or Dallas, places like that. That's easy to foresee.
Yeah, they could just use the existing Port Authority infrastructure for New York.
Yeah, well, in terms of Texas, they will probably maintain their coherence as a nation. Texas would be one of the few places that can maintain itself as an internal empire, as Texas. Of that, I have no doubt. So, but that would be like a superpower on the North American continent, as opposed to what many other people are dealing with at the city-state level, which would still be superpowers in their own right. And you'll see trade leagues like the Hanseatic Trade League form up and down the Mississippi and the Colorado. Now, what you mentioned about the Southwest as an example, and we can go into this at some other program, perhaps you're a guest on mine, would be the fact that the Colorado River, unfortunately, will probably dry up, and for all intents and purposes, the Southwest will become humanly inhabitable for the overwhelming majority of humanity. We're talking about a situation, for instance, where electricity makes the plumbing work and electricity makes the pumps work. So people won't be able to get oil out of gas stations. That oil may as well be on Mars. People won't be able to use toilets in major cities, so everything needs to be restructured to work on a gravity system.
With the systematic crippling of this government, they're probably going to have some level of, like, the shadow tech come out, the free energy devices that have been suppressed and everything else. So if we don't have the big environmental disasters occur and we just have an economic collapse which creates these city-state situations, you know, then you can also apply that as well. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. I very much appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Travesty, because the important thing is we are entering a new dark age, and how long that dark age lasts depends on how much of the newer technologies we can retain. If we enter a new libertarian city-state period, then what we need to make sure is that these city-states are factory states, and that these factory states are based not on the old technologies or what will be referred to in the future probably as black technologies because of the black smoke that's generated from coal burning, etc., but we need to refer or base our new economies on post-industrial technologies. So post-industrial technology would be nanotechnologies where you're printing the weapons for your city's army. Where you're
printers,
printing,
right?
Yes, where you're printing.
Very nice, yes.
So that is truly post-industrial. You're no longer dealing with a centralized economy commanding production. You have an autonomous regional production capability that, unlike the experiment conducted in communist China, where Mao Zedong wanted people to try and produce steel in every village, and you cannot produce industrial-grade steel in villages because you cannot get a forge or foundry that's large enough within that self-contained community. You need an entire urban infrastructure really to have industrial-grade steel. So because of that, that experiment was based more on a militia preparation so that people could build their own firearms or create this kind of real bastardized steel. I forgot there was a special name for it, some kind of just real second grade, lower grade kind of metal that would be utilitarian, but in no way, shape, or form fit for modern mechanized warfare, rather fit on militia resistance. So that's what he was trying to create in China. Now, we're trying to go beyond that. If we get to that level, we are truly desperate. We're trying to get to the point where we have nanotechnologies that can maintain a prosperity in these cities. Unfortunately, we'll go through a dark age, which all too many people will die off, and many of these technologies may be lost. That is why we've got to think of as people, they have seed banks where the elite are trying to preserve seeds for in case Monsanto's Terminator seed goes worldwide and kills off all organic seeds and leaves us all starving. The elite will have seeds to grow their own food and to ultimately repopulate the world with viable reproductive botanicals. Now, we need
Merhaba arkadaşlar, ben Mertcan. Bugün Outlast'ın 3. bölümünü çekeceğiz Oğuz abiyle. Konuğumuz olan Ege'ye çok teşekkürlerimizi sunuyoruz. En son ne yaptınız Oğuz abi? Beni bir bilgilendirebilir misin?
Şimdi şu duşlardan kaçıp duşlardan geçip kaçma bölümüne geldik. Orada galiba öldüydük ya. Tam hatırlamıyorum ama neyse, bir devam edelim bakalım.
Devam et de bir bakalım abi, ne yapmışsınız, neler yapmışsınız, hep beraber görelim.
Aynen. Bu arada sesi biraz arttırdım. Ses konusunda uyarılar geldi.
Vallahi benlik bir sıkıntı yok.
Bu arada hemen en başında şey de söyleyeyim. Bu işte yorum yapıyorlar. Abi çok kasıyor, şöyle oluyor, böyle oluyor. Şu anda bizde kasma yok. Bir saniye, şunu durduralım. Bizde herhangi bir kasma yok. O Fraps'ten dolayı. Fraps'e çekilen tüm videolar kasar. Yani grafik ayarları yüzünden. Şu anda Hype'da oynuyoruz galiba. Değil mi? Hype'da oynuyoruz, evet.
Hype'da galiba, evet.
Bu yüzden kasıyor. Yoksa yani bizimle bir alakası yok ya da oyunla.
Sistemimizle alakası yok diyelim. Hani sistemimiz gerçekten güzel bir bilgisayarla oynuyoruz.
Ah, yapma be.
Halit senin falan.
Aynen. Şunu bir saniye kapatalım. Ah be. Abi. Dur bir dakika, Skype'tan çıkayım.
Çık abi çık. Çıkarsan ben de sana.
Halit. Yok öyle değil. Halit arama, gözünü seveyim.
Ya adam açacaksın abi. Ya çıkarınca açacaksın.
Ya yapma, gözünü seveyim ya.
Abi aç ana bacı kaya.
Ne yapacağız? Dur bir saniye şunu. Görünmez yapalım.
Adam yine aradı.
Yok. Ah, tamamdır. Daha videonun başında böyle şey olur mu ya?
Neyse, bir şey olmaz ya.
Halit Arman Usta. Videoda onun da adı olsun. Bu arada. Ay!
Kaç gel. Abo! Bas. Öldün mü abi?
Ben öldüm, adam kafamı kopardı, bas diyor ya. Hep Halit yüzünden, hep.
Acaba başka bir giriş yeri falan mı var hani? Uyarı mı verdiler oradan gitme falan gibisine?
Yok moruk. Buradan direkt koşarak geçeceğim ben.
Ha. Abi o kapıları da biraz yavaş kapat ya. Hayvan gibi kapatıyorsun sonra geliyorlar.
Bu arada deşti adam beni.
Abi onu gördüm. Mideden daldı sana.
Aynen bayağı daldı bana.
Onun hakkında video çektim abi. Onu da akşama yayınlarız herhalde.
Hangi oyun?
Surgeon Simulator 2013. Bu arada onun da reklamını yapalım buradan.
O doktor oyunu değil mi?
Ha, ameliyat falan yapıyorsun ya cerrahi boyu.
Doktorculuk.
Gibi.
Bir saniye şurada cam var herhalde. Buradan dışarıya. Tamam.
Atla. Oo güzel yapmışlar. Üste bakabiliyor musun acaba abi?
Neye?
Hani üstten böyle hafiften bir bakarsın ya camdan ne yapıyorlar falan gibisinde.
Yok.
Ona yememiş demek ki.
Tamamdır. Hemen şurayı açalım. Hemen burayı açtık.
Kapı açıldı ha.
Evet. Şunu kapatalım. Arkadan gelirse duyalım yani. Pardon. Bu ilk önce bir şuraya bakalım. Eğer orada yol yoksa buraya geliriz.
Abi şu kapıları yani lütfen canını yiyeyim diyeyim hani şive kullanayım falan canını yiyeyim. Hani
Yavaş mı kapat?
Çünkü hani oh be duymadı diyorsun. Kapıyı kapatayım diyorsun. Şak diye bir ses çıkıyor. Hani
Ya.
canavar oluyor lan oluyor. Baksana abi.
Bir saniye. Oy. Yine.
Şey de olur ya.
Hocam hoş geldin güle güle. Aç abi aç.
Abi bir baksana ya merak ettim ne oluyor arkada.
Dur.
Abi arkaya bak. Havalandırmaya... Oh! İçeri
Oh!
girmiş. Güç davsus falan. Abi oraya gitme zehirlenirsin. Şeyden git abi bak yukarıda bir havalandırma var gördün mü?
Tamam.
Onu ilk başta gördün mü?
Oh. Hocam aksiyon. Action.
Adam onu görmedi mi şimdi senin oradan çıktığını?
Gördü ama o buraya nasıl çıksın ayı?
Ne bileyim o vura indirsin. Eline çıkarsa şaşırma. Bir şey mi gördün abi sen?
Ha?
Abi sana bir taktik vereyim mi oyun hakkında?
Dur.
Abi
Bismillah.
koşarken E'ye bas. Hızlı koşarken. Ne oluyor lan? Dışarı mı çıktın abi?
Bilmiyorum şu anda ben de göremedim. Koşarken oh shit.
Oh my. What the going on?
Holy shit. Oğlum nereye düştük? Dışarıdan geçen alternatif yol bul. Hocam bulalım. Ama
Buraya doğru çıkacaksın abi büyük ihtimal. Şimdi duşlar yukarıda olur.
evet. Bir saniye. Şuraya bakalım pil mil var mı? Hani toplayalım çünkü çok karanlık.
Pil çok önemli. Gerçekten de.
Yani istesek biz şimdi pil hilesi yaparız ama o zaman da oyunun keyfi çıkmaz.
Pil hilesi aslında trailer diye bir şeyler var ya abi onlar da olur da.
Ama oyunun keyfi çıkmaz yani.
Tabi abi.
Şöyle her şeyin altına bakalım. Allah!
Çilingir
Ay.
Ahmet Usta falan. Yardır abi yardır.
Ne ara geldi bu?
Adamın ben bir vesikalık fotoğrafını gördüm o şeyde. Hani ilk başta
Vesikalık.
gezirdin ya. Elinde balta falan.
Buraya kadarmış.
Videonun sonuna geldik falan. Abi oradan kapıyı kapat yatağın altına gir bak yatağın altına girebiliyorsun. Şimdi girme abi adam gördü zaten.
Ya zaten giremedim ben de öldürmesini bekledim beni.
Ha.
O yüzden ya.
Adam görünce yatağın altına gir abi.
Tamam. Bir saniye. Hemen vukuat başladı. Hemen bu. Hoş geldin.
Hemen nasılsın ya? Adamın oraya bir girişi var. Haydi. Adamın tipe for. Hey yavrum hey, kaç abi kaç. İzleme. Arkamdan kapıyı hemen ört abi. Kapıyı ört
Kapı
hemen.
yok, kapı.
Gir abi o zaman, hiç uğraşma.
Allah. Allah.
Abi çok sıkıntılı
Bir-
işler ya.
Bir dakika dur.
Çıksın abi falan, şimdi çıkarsın o gelir.
Aynen, o yüzden
Işığı kapat, ışığı falan. Bir yakınlaştır falan abi. Gitti herhalde.
bir dakika dur. O ses ne? Ah! Ah! Ay. Dur.
Geğirme sesi ise benden gelmiş olabilir.
Hayır, yok.
Ha tamam o zaman.
Yürüme sesiydi. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nereye gitti, nereye gittiğini de göremiyorum. Çok tehlikeli işler bunlar.
Abi sen şu alternatif yolu bir bul da. Sıkıntı değil, ondan basar kaçarız ya.
Tamam da.
Pilim bitmek üzere abi bu arada.
Dur, tamamen bitsin, öyle değiştireceğim.
Öyle yap abi. Hani ben söyleyeyim mi sonradan? Ha orada değil mi abi? Bak bak nasıl geliyor şerefsiz. Endamını ettiğim.
Hoca.
Bak. Gel la gel, soğuk.
Bismillah.
Oğuz abi fena koşuyorsun ama.
Koşarken E'ye bas, ne yapıyor?
Abi o şey böyle yan tarafa bakabiliyorsun koşarken hızlıca.
Ha, onu biliyorum ya.
Onu yap abi, o önemli. O soğuk nerede abi?
Bilmiyorum, gitti galiba. O da her yerden çıkıyor. Bu arada yolu buldum.
Oradan mı gördün abi yolu?
Ha, o eleman kapıyı kırarken ben de karşısına baktım.
Demek ki kapıları kırdırmak lazım o lavuğa.
Şimdi bu oradan gidiyor ya, biz buradan hızlıca koşacağız.
Evet. Görecek tabi. Koşunca.
Tamamdır, daha gelemez herhalde. Oh.
Yandan duvarı kırıp gelirse izle.
Oo, yok, burayı kırar bu. Bu burayı kırar.
Tamam, buradan daha gelemez.
Ay,
Ah,
aklım
ben
başımdan
tırstım lan.
gitti.
Tövbe yarabbi yarasıyla. Oğuz abi bir daha bağırırsam evin uydudan bombalatırım var ya.
Dur dur. Ama gerçekten yani şu anda
Dur dur 2 dakika dur abi.
aynen, dur 2 dakika soluklanalım. Ama gerçekten moruk
Tavşan
öyle
gibi kafayı çıkarttı ya la.
öyle böyle değil. Ya çok kötü korktum.
Ya soğuk ya.
Yani gerçekten korktum. Hani bunu şaka olarak zannedenler olabilir. Oğlum, aniden çıkmayın lan. Sapık mısınız lan?
Bunlar şey değil mi abi, kafayı yemişler, beyinsiz miydi neydi bunlar?
Ha, aynen.
Televizyon falan izliyorlardı hatta.
Yok, onlar başka. Onlar rahip gibi bir şeydi.
Bu da aynı abi işte, hani kafadan gitmiş yani. Oradan biri mi geçti bana mı öyle geldi?
Kapat kapat kapat kapat.
Abi insan gibi kapatsın.
Bana yardım etmek istiyor.
Bir açsana abi, ne olacak? Sana bir yardım etsin.
Yok yok, boş ver.
Arkana bir el atsın.
Çok korkuyorum moruk. Şurayı bir açalım, neyse.
Bir açsana abi. Şimdi sana girecek abi. Oo.
Aa. Ay, ne oldu lan? Pil varmış.
Milletin derdine bak, Oğuz abinin derdine bak. Abi şu adamla bir konuş, bir adamı bir yerine bir tak ya. Adam o kadar peşinden koşuyor bir şey anlatmak için.
Yok yok boş ver yok. Manyak lan o.
Adam diyor sana bir sır vereyim diyor. Oğuz abi he diyor.
Ya he he.
Adam o kadar delirmiş.
Yo he he. Ana. Ana.
Adam oyun yapmışlar, ne düşünüyormuş acaba bu konu hakkında. Abi biz bu yaş sınırı koyalım.
Dur.
Abi senin boşanmasını bekliyorum, ne yapayım?
Ya
Adam
birader.
demiş ya,
Bura
"Dedim,
açılmıyor mu?
yapsa
Dur
yerim."
dur. Dur bura açılmıyor mu? Hadi.
Ne yapacaksın abi, domalayayım mı diyeceğim.
Ana. Moruk ben videonun başlığını buldum.
Osbirci falan, hani 31. geliyor.
Aynen. Neyse bu kadar
Osbirci yap.
bu kadar izleme yeter.
Aynen.
Ay. Ne oyunmuş be.
Neler var neler. Üstüne atlamasın. Bak üstüne atladı, ben biliyorum abi.
Hadi.
Okumun dumanı.
Öldü mü o? Öldü. Heh,
Bize
tamam.
sırlayan adamın yanına git. Bu ne yapıyor?
Bitlenmiş. Pil mil toplayalım biz buradan da.
Biz burada yok ya.
Evet.
Pilim bitiyor abi.
Aha.
Hı. Adam şimdi şey gelecek, sana bir sır vereceğim dememiş miydim lan ben falan, niye kaçtın lan diye. Düştün ya bir de aşağıya, hazır.
Hiç gelmesin o.
Abi sen bak oradan gitme, sandalye vardı orada bak. Oğuz abi
Nerede?
bak geride. Arkana bak abi. Oğuz abi şimdi küfür edeceğim, arkana bir bak.
Bu mu?
Gör. O yukarıya bir baksana abi, tam o yukarıya.
Nasıl
Oradan
ya? Nereye ya?
Yokmuş tamam.
Ya
Abi.
var ya.
Yukarıya doğru çıkacaksın, onu unutma da, hani adam aşağı attı ya seni.
Ya hoca. Buradan aşağı düşmememiz lazım bizim. Oraya bir geçit koymuş eleman.
Tabii canım, koymuştur da.
Bir git senle mi uğraşacağım ben ya?
Şuna bir kafa at abi ya. Bir bayasın, bir yere düşsün, kendine gelsin.
Tokatla şoker.
Adamın soğuğuna ya. Abi orayı bir kere daha dene. Heh.
What's the experiment? The dead will flow in the living.
Deneyi devam ettiriyorlarmış. Space bara basacakmışsın abi.
Atladı. Düştüm zannettim.
Adam doğmuş, annesi demiş ki sen demiş oradan oraya atlayacaksın demiş, adam o derece attı.
Ne oldu lan? O ne lan?
Ne olmuş lan?
Geçmiş olsun hocam.
Hocam sıkıntılarımız var galiba.
Okusana sesli bir şekilde.
Benim okumam iyi değildir abi, sen oku.
Benim de iyi değil. O zaman şöyle biraz bekletelim, ondan sonra geçelim.
Millet okusun.
Okumak isteyen buradan durdurup okur.
Adam Münihliymiş.
Ha?
Münih.
Bir dakika dur. Pil arayalım, pil. Konuşamadım bir an.
Abi
Tıkandım.
sana şey söyleyeyim, hani bu şeyler var ya, klozetler falan var ya.
Hı.
Onlardan yakında bir adam falan çıkar, hani ben bekliyorum öyle bir şey, onlara dikkat et. Asansör var abi orada. Asansör.
Bu mu? Yok,
Aha.
kapalı bak.
Ha, kusura bakma abi o zaman.
Zamanımı yedin, zamanımı.
2 saniyemi çaldım, ben atomu bölerdim falan. Piller değil mi?
Orada ay. Oy.
Yavrum oğlan nereden çıktın?
Ne oluyor lan?
Çok kötü bir niyetim yok.
Lan vurma. Ben sana ne yaptım lan?
İnsan insana bunu yapar mı?
Pis herif.
Abi yanından hemen atla.
Aha. Atladım.
Oradan yukarı kaç bas abi oradan. O lavuk nerede?
Oha geri dönmüş lan.
Şeyden
Ah.
sağ sol sağ sol. Öldün mü?
Olmadı.
Yoksa oyun
Öldüm.
kendi şeyi mi?
Öldüm. Bir dakika meyve suyu içeyim ben.
O asansörün şeyini mi bulacağız acaba? Anahtarını falan.
Bilmiyorum ki. Bir dakika dur. Şuradan bir koşarak geçeyim ben.
Aa baksana adam orada gel
Bu
ya.
eleman dur hemen hazır olalım. Heh,
Adam oradan geldi.
hadi. Hadi. Oh tamam. Bu sefer
Bir şey hallettik. Kamerayı bir aç abi.
hallettik halletmesine de.
Oo aşağıda bir şeyler vardı.
Evet gördüm ben onu. Bir saniye.
Klozette değil abi şeyde.
Gördüm böyle.
O fırlayabilir.
Fırlamadı. Pil aradım da pil yokmuş. Hı. Şöyle şunu kapatayım gelmesin.
Kapatayım gelmesin.
Pil var mı? Pil yok. Bir dakika
Kahraman
tamam
bir şey.
onu gördüm.
Kesin
Ee,
oradan gideceksin abi.
Oradan gideceğiz zaten. Pil topluyorum. Evet burada zaten kapalıymış.
Abi
Demek
sen
ki.
kamerayı çok kullanıyorsun ya. 51 dakika olmuş kamerayı kullanalı. Az insaf yani.
O zaman kapatalım.
Az
Bunda bir şey var mı?
dinlensin.
Az soğusun la.
Şey diyordu ya hani Cem Yılmaz. Makina soğuk falan. İzledin mi sen o bölümü?
Ha
abi?
evet aynen. Neydi Gora'da mı? Yok şeyde pardon ya.
Şey yapıyor ya, tiyatro gibi bir şey.
Stand up. Evet stand up.
Ha, stand up. Makina
Yapma.
soğuk.
Burayı açsaydı keşke.
Abi şimdi o hani karanlık yer oyunun şeyi zaten.
Berkcan. Buraya gireceğiz kardeş.
Girelim abi yapacak bir şey yok. Bas. Abi koşarsan korkmazsın. Hemen. Kuş denen bir deney.
Neyse boş ver.
Sep var gibi konuşuyor.
Dön. Dön abi dön. Buradan buraya ses duydum. Bu işaret
Abi.
ne lan?
Bu işaret neydi ki? Ben bu işareti çok görüyordum ya. Bir ara.
Biyo neydi? İsmini unuttum.
Radyasyon falan mıydı?
Radyasyon gibi bir şey. Biyo bir şeydi. Biyo.
Zararlı bir şeydi ama değil mi?
Biohazard İngilizcesi.
Türkçesini bilmeye lüzum yok falan.
Türkçesini unuttum işte. Kimyasal işte moruk. Oo.
Abi sen yukarı çıkman lazım. Habire aşağı indiriyor oyunu. Hani lağma doğru gideceksin herhalde. Abi buraya çok dikkat et.
Zaten müziğe bakılırsa müziği
Tamam.
duyuyor musun?
Yok müzik sesi gelmiyor da film bitecek haberin olsun.
Sen şanslısın biliyorum. İyice bitsin öyle değiştirir. Ne oldu lan? Bir anda FPS 5'lere FPS çok düştü ya. Gördün mü FPS'yi?
FPS'yi görmedim de 14'ü gördüm ben.
9'u gördüm ben az önce. Ne oldu?
Piller yakıyor hani.
Aynen.
Abi birisi de çıksın ya, ne var ki? %50-50 şansım var, birisi tutsun, yalan mıyım abi ya?
Aynen.
Çok istiyorum.
Dur.
Bak orayı dönersin şimdi, bir tanesi üstüne atlar.
Canlı mısın lan?
Ayağınla bir kafasına bir vur abi. Low falan diye.
Zaten Dead Island'da vuruyorduk. Dead Island biliyor musun?
Yok onu. Yok.
Bismillah.
Abi, kaçma abi kaç. Adamın o koşuyu gördün mü? At, sanki at çalıyor hani. Öyle
Hayır
bir koş.
moruk, o adam değildi ki.
Ne koştu ki oradan? İnsan koşmadı mı?
Hayır. İnsan değil o. Videoda görürüz moruk. Videoyu atalım.
Videoda görürüz.
Aynen videoda görürüz. Montajda görürüz.
O şey değil mi abi?
İki vanayı çevirerek suya akıt. Ne vanası hocam? Buraya mı ineceğiz? Yok, buraya inmeyeceğiz.
Ora zehirli galiba ya.
Olabilir.
Ya da bok kokusundan yukarı fışkırmış hani. Yemleş.
Geliyor vallahi geliyor.
Ben de fotoğraf halinde olduğu için şu an video.
Bak
Ha gördüm, tamam. Abi orayı bekleme çünkü orada tahta. Gelemedi ya o.
döndü.
Soğuk diye bağırsana.
Gel.
Yemedi mi lan?
Önceki videoda da öyle dedim.
Bir şey oldu ha. Ha gece modunu açmışsın. Ben de bir an bir açıp kapanınca dedim ne oluyor lan diye. Abi seni oradan çekip çıkartırsa hiç şaşırma.
Çekip çıkartırsa.
Aynen. Şu üstüne atlayabilir. Oyunun 2 tane vana bulacağız da çok geniş olduğu için zorluyor.
Aynen.
Hah gördüm. Arkanı dönüyor musun, zombi falan.
Zombi mi?
Oyunda zombi yok, zombi görüyorsun abi. Hani o kadar talihsiziz. Sen birisine
Bahtsız bedevi kutup ayısı.
şeyde bir filmde kutup ayısı saldırıyor diye şeyde Amazon'da adama.
Bir dakika, burada bu şeyler varsa o eleman gelecek herhalde. Hafifçe şöyle yavaş açalım.
Açış şekline bakayım. Lah diye açar.
Geliyor mu lan?
Abi şeyden bir şey gözükmüyor ki, sisten.
Aynen.
Sis mi diyeyim, bok kokusu mu diyeyim, hani yeşil olur ya böyle.
Aynen. Allahu Akbar.
Sanki
Allah,
haber ya.
geçemedim.
Kapıyı ört abi. Oğuz abi bir de böyle ışığı kapatıyorsun ya, kameranın ışığını.
Korkudan.
Ya adamın aklını alırlar.
Ya
Oğuz abi,
aldı bile.
adamın aklını alırlar. O kadar dalga geçtik.
Oley.
Manayı mı buldun?
Yok. Oh. Oh be.
Çaktırmadan bak abi.
Gel de bir dalga geçeyim seninle gel.
Şöyle kafasına taş falan fırlat abi. Abi bence Van'a canavarın olduğu yerde. Abi o kadar da
Aha! Vallahi ah. Ulan son anda
bokumu ye falan.
gelme. Ya resmen köşe kapmaca oynuyoruz bu malla ya.
Göz göze geldiniz ya.
Aynen bir bakıştık. Meyve suyu içiyorum bu arada. O gitsin de ben buradan çıkayım.
O acaba önceden insan mıydı neydi?
Hadi selametle.
Abi kaç tane? Bir tane mi Van açtın sen?
Evet bir tane açtım da diğeri nerede bilmiyorum.
Diğeri sıkıntı ya.
Hmm.
Bence büyük ihtimal canavarın gittiği yerde gibi
Dur
geliyor ama
bakayım bura nereye çıkıyor.
şimdi canavarın yuvasına çıkar var ya, hani çoluğunu çocuğunu öldürürüz falan. İyice sarar bize.
Ha bura başladığımız yere. Daha doğrusu düştüğümüz yere çıkıyor mu acaba?
Acaba bu oyunda bıçak falan benzeri bir şeyler kullanabiliyor muyuz? Daha sonraki şeylerde.
Biliyoruzdur herhalde bilmiyorum. Hani savaşmak için falan.
Adam bir de gazeteci ya. Hani kabiliyeti yoktur falan ama zor edince de kullanır.
Yani o gerekli aslında biliyor musun?
Tabii ki de.
Şu anda kaçamıyoruz falan.
Ya en azından bir savunma şeyi olsa hani korktuğun zaman böyle kafasına indirirsin bir tane.
Aynen. Doküman buldum.
O gördüğüm böğür mü böbrek mi ne?
Hangisi?
Neymiş bir başvuru formu. Ne güzel okuyorduk. Şu böbrek mi ne o?
O ne? Şu mide,
Böyle
bağırsak var.
Akciğer o galiba.
Bu ne? Bu pankreas herhalde.
Bilmem.
Bu
Adamın resmen şeyini seçiyor. Hani midesini delmişler böyle. Bu
Aynen.
mantı falan.
aynen anlatıyoruz biz burada. Dinleyen
Aynen.
dinlesin.
Bacak, damar. Fena ya. Biraz daha küçük yapsalarmış keşke.
Ulan Bak.
Abi suyu takip etsene. Ne bileyim olur ya suyu bir takip et. Nereden geliyor nereden gidiyor. Belli
oğlum.
mi?
Oğlum her yerde su var lan.
Ne bileyim birisinin tekile takıl git.
Ha, yok bu değil.
Belki ışığı bulursun ne bileyim. Şimdi o canavar çekip çıkartacak abi.
Aynen.
Abi şurada plan var. Solda.
Bir saniye.
Plan var abi orada. Bak. Aşağıdakini mi açtık?
Biz neredeyiz? Bir saniye bir. O neydi lan? Bekle.
Şimdi. Keşke resim çekme falan
Ha
olsa.
yok moruk bu şeymiş. Ya bir dakika dur. Geliyor. Vallahi geliyor.
Sarı boruyu takip edersin abi sonra.
Aa evet. Ama hangisine gittik ilk olarak? O sorun.
Abi geri yine bakarız ya bulalım da.
Hoş geldin abi. Güle güle.
Yine mi geldi?
Bye bye.
Gerisine kurban. Adam çekip çıkartmaya çalışıyor. Şöyle bir resmini çek abi.
Ay yanlış girdim.
Ne sinir olmuştur ama. Adam şimdi ta oraya dolanıp buraya gelecek yani. Koş abi koş, öyle koş. Kaysın bizi.
Oğlum biz buraya açtık zaten ya.
Tamam o zaman vanaları
Sarıya gideceğiz.
Ben sana saraya git dedim abi zaten.
Ulan üstüne koştum.
Adam vesikalı kaldı yine. Merhaba yani.
Aynen ya.
Tika bak ya.
Neyse.
Bir de girişi var ya hani böyle geliyor tekrar gidiyor.
Bölümü burada sonlandırak mı? Bayağı uzun oldu çünkü.
Kaç dakika oldu ki abi?
Bayağı oldu yani, dakikasına hiç bakmadım da.
Ha, tamam o zaman videoyu burada sonlandıralım.
3. bölümün sonu olsun. Bu biraz da merak etsinler.
Aynen. Neyse arkadaşlar 3. bölümün sonuna geldik. İzlediğiniz için çok teşekkür ederiz. İyi veya kötü yorumlarınızı YouTube'a ya da Facebook adresimize yazarsanız çok seviniriz. Teşekkür
Ee,
ederiz.
Yani beğenenler beğendim butonuna, beğenmeyenler de beğenmedim butonuna tıklasın. Yorum da atabilirsiniz, fark etmez. Abone olun. Abone olun lan.
Bana hiç abone olmayın yani. Benim hiç bu şeyle bir karım yok.
Ne kârı lan?
Abi hep sana dönüyor bu işler ya. Dönerse sermayem yok benim.
Ya moruk, sonuçta hani hepimizin ortak kanalı o.
Yok abi yok şeyden değil.
Ha.
Abi sen kapatmadın mı hala bunu biz?
Yok, konuşuyoruz işte. Neyse kapatıyorum, hadi görüşürüz.
Kapat abi.